Welcome to another episode of our personal empowerment audio program, Finding Yourself in Paradise. Hi, I'm Michael Benner.
And I'm Steve Snyder, and our program today is entitled Consciousness Unfolding. This is sort of an overview of the nature of consciousness itself and how it has evolved, grown, unfolded through the ages. As we take a look at the evolution of Homo sapiens, how we went from hunter-gatherers in the nomadic age, and then we moved into planting seeds and growing food and domesticating animals in the agrarian age, and then we started moving into the cities and building stuff in the industrial age, and then we invented computers and started creating knowledge being so incredibly powerful as we moved into the information age. And I think it's pretty clear each one of those ages happened much, much faster than the one before, and this next one is already upon us. We call it the age of consciousness.
You can feel the curve accelerating. What's the term? Hyperbolic?
Indeed.
You know, buckle up, kiddies. Here comes the rocket sled into the future. We can learn from the past. We can see this development, or Steve and I like to call it unfoldment. I mean, it is a growth. There is an attainment. There is certainly a quality of development or improvement. But what we like about unfoldment is the idea that the potential is within us and inevitably going to come out, need some expression, will be developed. But then to be aware of that process is to consciously choose to initiate your growth. That's a very exciting point in the evolution of human beings, where they look around and go, this is what life's about, growth, and that's learning and healing, so let's get it on. You know, if growth and improvement and learning is what it's about, then yippee-i-o-ki-yay. Self-initiated growth, quite a concept.
Yeah, and that's part of what the evolution of consciousness is to be aware of the fact that I am a being who gets to choose not only that I want to grow, but in which direction I want to grow and at which speed I want to take that growth. And I get to initiate, I get to direct, conduct, orchestrate, choreograph my growth. That is an evolution that is of consciousness. That's not just being smart, because you can be smart and pretty much think what everybody else thinks, except be a little better at it than everybody else is. This is seeing how your mind is a unique thing, and you become aware of the fact that you are conscious. Now, that seems pretty simple. I mean, that you become aware of the fact that you're conscious, but that's something that people didn't do for most of humankind. I mean, nomadic people, hunter-gatherers, they lived in tribes, and they understood that they were unique and that their tribe was different than other people's tribes. But they didn't really have time to sit and contemplate the universe. You know, they were like, survival was really a major thing, and they had to constantly be moving, looking for food, gathering food, and survival being pretty much a 24/7 operation. In fact, before we domesticated animals, which came much later, survival was a 24/7 operation, because we had to have sentries posted awake 24/7 to be aware of wild animals and other invaders that could come into our tribe. So this survival was such an involved process, we didn't have time to sit and contemplate. But one day, it always occurred to me how interesting this, one day somebody must have been the first one to go, I'm sick and tired of going south every winter and north every summer. I want to stay here. I'm going to plant these seeds in the ground. I've seen it done, and I'm going to grow this food, and then we're going to take and make this fence, and we're going to keep animals that we've domesticated. I know it didn't happen like that, but the bottom line is somebody must have been the first one to think about, let's stop this hunter-gatherer thing. Let's start moving into what became the agrarian age.
This is also the point, if you consider it carefully, where human beings must have, largely for the first time, begun to think about owning private property.
Right.
You know, the many indigenous peoples, so-called pre-industrialized peoples, like the Native American Indians, when Europeans began to conquer this country, the United States, and colonize it, the indigenous Indians were like baffled, this idea of ownership. You know, it's like, how do you own the land, they would ask.
Right. They would sell us the land, but what they thought they were doing was like leasing us the ability to use it. You know, they didn't get the idea that you actually thought you were going to own this thing called the land. Come on.
I read this quote where this one Indian chief said, and how deep do you own the land? And the white guy said, all the way down. He's thinking of mineral rights, right? All the way to the middle of the earth. And the Indian looked at him after pausing a minute and said, And the sky? Do you own the sky too? Well,
yeah, all the way up, my airspace.
This was before airplanes, so the old white guy didn't have much to say about that. But yeah, this is a fairly recent concept in the evolution of humanity, the idea that we could own little bits of land, and that means other people can't. And so out of that comes the whole feudal system of the landlord, of the king, of might makes right, of armies, of war. As long as we were nomadic and few in number, this was not a problem.
Right. There were little tribal skirmishes, but war as a concept, really that began with the agrarian age.
Yeah. And again, talking about the Native American Indian, there were so few human beings on the earth that the introduction of the horse to North America by the Spanish led to all kinds of war that the indigenous Indians didn't have. They never ran into each other until they got horses from the Spanish, and now suddenly their territory is growing. So it was inevitable and continues to be inevitable as the population rate of planet Earth accelerates into the 21st century.
So when we take a look at that evolution of consciousness that moved us from hunter-gatherers into growers, into people who became more stable in their lifestyles, I think the most important thing to look at is it was to become safe. It would be to create a higher likelihood there would be food available by growing it right there, by raising animals. You know, what we did was we guaranteed our survival by not having to day-to-day look for meat every day. We found a way to prepare for the future. And I think that's a big part of what happened as we moved from hunter-gatherers into being more conscious and became agrarian. We started planning for our future. We started squirreling away our nuts, as the squirrels used to do. We started thinking ahead farther and growing crops, domesticating animals, that was part of it. But also we started creating our relationships. We started creating religion. We started creating societies. We started creating civilization, if you will. And all this was to give us a sense of feeling safer. The us that became larger and larger, safer from the them that became farther and farther away.
And there's something organic about a tribal level. Tribes are usually 120 to 150. No matter what culture you look at in the world.
150 seems to be the magic number around the entire world. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, tribes bigger than that, the tribe splits off into other tribes. Smaller than that, it's a big family, right? But the tribal unit, there's something, again, organic about the economy of scale in that area. And then it wasn't really, as you've pointed out already or foreshadowed for us, that as we began the so-called industrial revolution, the manufacturing, that we needed even more centralization. And we went from family to tribe to city. And this is the urbanization of the 18th century. And thereafter, as more and more people began to move into the cities, in the United States, the immigrants often would head right for the city, not the farm. That's where the opportunity, even if they wanted eventually to be a farmer, you'd go to the city, get a job in a factory, make some money, and then go off and buy your little homestead.
So we did that for the same exact reasons that we moved from into the agrarian age, just for safety and security. Because here we wouldn't have to depend on the weather. You know, our crops might not grow. We got a guaranteed paycheck. We're working on the assembly line, and every Friday we got that paycheck coming in. You know, and we know how much it's going to be, and it's there every single Friday. And that sense of being able to provide and protect our families, that's why people moved into this whole new way of looking at the world. It's always about being safer, protecting your family better, creating a better lifestyle for your family. And that's what evolution of consciousness is about, is creating a way of being freer of fear, safer, to be able to have less time spent in survival issues and more time available to contemplate, to think, to develop, to grow. And I think that's where we went. When we went into the industrial age, now all of a sudden we weren't working 24/7. We had specific hours we worked. I mean, when you have a farm, and I actually now have a farm. When you have a farm, something could happen almost any time of the day, 24/7. But when you have a job at the factory, you go in at 9 and you leave at whatever time it was, probably 9 at night in those days. But you work your X number of hours, and then you have time off. That was a whole new concept, time off, that got created. And time off was what allowed human beings to start taking a look at themselves and explore questions that beyond survival into, like, oh, why are we here? And, you know, what's this all about?
And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't point out that there is a downside to all of this also, that part of what we traded out in moving to the salaried position in the city was access to the sacredness of that land and a psychic connection, if you will, to nature and all things. But to move into a city, for all the benefits that you've hinted at here, little by little, we begin to feel a loss because it's all paved over. You know, that great Joni Mitchell line, that paved over paradise and put up a parking lot while you weren't looking. In fact, when they first put the parking lot in, you were probably happy. Oh boy, a parking lot, a place to park my car, that I drive on these long ribbons of cement called freeway so I can get to another parking lot. And then living inside buildings that are increasingly secure, yeah, but then again, increasingly removed from nature. So there's a yin and a yang to this, and many of us now long for a little bit of nature, a little connection to the rural countryside, and it's increasingly difficult to get. It's hard to make a living out there in the heartland of America. All these little towns are dying, all these family farms being gobbled up by corporate America. Same corporations that own the cities now own the countryside as well.
And yet we still strive for that country feel in our lives. We still strive for having some of that. So we move from the cities, as we move from the industrial age into the information age, we move from the cities into the suburbs, So we have our own little teeny piece of land, at least. So we have our own backyard. So we don't work in the factories anymore. Now we work in the offices, and more people in the information age are working from their own homes on their laptops, And so it really is about leaving the cities in a way, leaving the cities and moving to the suburbs. And I even think I heard the word exurbs, which is even farther out than the suburbs,
really?
And what used to be called the boonies is now called the. So people don't have to live right in the cities anymore to do the work that they have to do. And as we've evolved, I think we've created the idea of more free time, more leisure time. We went from 12, 15, 16-hour days of work down to 8-hour days of work, and for some people it's more like an hour and a half, some days, and 6 hours another day. And it's not like it used to be, and there's much, much more free time as we've moved into this information age, which began in the 60s or 50s with the computers, and it's really like we're already well into the end of the computer age it's so blasé. Kids who were born today, computers is nothing, no big deal. We are moving because computers have done some amazing things for our ability to figure stuff out. We have created more ability to start looking at those big questions. I think in this age of consciousness, it's a part of it. I think a big part of it is more time to ask why, more time to not know things, because that was the age of the computer age. It was all about knowing. We went from hunting to growing to building to knowing, and I think now knowing is less important. Wondering, I think, exploring, investigating, contemplating, I think, is where this next stage of consciousness is taking us.
Yeah, you're taking the words right off the tip of my tongue. All of these previous ages that we've talked about, driven at first by survival and then by the advantages of industrialization and urbanization and the change of the culture, the sophistication. It's been a pretty exciting ride. Then we begin to look at how out of balance we got. Touched on that a minute ago with nature. We're trying to find a better balance. But it's not until we find ourselves stepping into this new age, you've heard that term before, this age of consciousness, to be aware that you're conscious, to be consciously aware. Steve called it the awakening. This is the point where we begin to ask, why? Why am I doing this? It's not just survival. We had that wired even as nomads. These are just different forms of survival and different qualities of life. But now we're really moving into an age of philosophy or awareness, if you will, where we have elevated ourselves, I think, ascended to a perspective that is more inclusive, more comprehensive, and begs the question of, why am I doing this? If I can design my life in this way, having come this far, I can choose any one of these. I could be a hunter-gatherer, right? I could go back 10,000 years and live like that if I wanted. In fact, some people do that and call it vacation, right? I could go back to the agrarian age. I could get a little farm outside, or at least make a nice garden in my suburban backyard, as you indicated. So I can choose to revisit any one of these ages or these eras, or, as most of us do without realizing it, incorporating them all into what we call our lifestyle. But the thing about this new age, I think, this age of consciousness that we're stepping into now, this awakening, is we're faced with this most important question of all, I think, of the who, what, where, when, how questions. The why has got to be the most significant, the most profound. Why are we doing this? If not to survive. I mean, if survival's the issue, I know why I'm doing it, to stay alive, but I'm way beyond that now. Why am I making the choices I'm making? Why should I have children? Hold on, just because everybody else is? Why should I get a 9-to-5 job in the city and wear a suit every day just because it's expected of me? I mean, maybe that is the decision I end up making, but for most people, has it been a decision or a matter of routine where we just go out and do what everybody else does because everybody else does it?
So one of the definitions of moving from the information age into this new age of consciousness is that we start asking questions about why we do things, about our motivations, about what's underneath the behaviors that we have. When we thought that knowledge was power, when we thought that, and knowledge in the last 30 or 40 years became the most valuable commodity in the entire world, I mean, in the information age. So we were talking earlier, Michael said, more valuable than gold? And I said, well, knowing whether the price of gold is going to go up or the price of gold is going to go down is more valuable than gold. Yeah, knowledge is the most valuable commodity at all. But I think what happens is, as we've understood that knowledge for the purpose of knowing stuff and having power and getting money and getting stuff and building our wealth and building and all that stuff, as we become more conscious, we understand that the futility of that's really not what it's all about, that people who have done that aren't happy, that's not the goal. The goal isn't more stuff. The guy with the most stuff wins is not how it works. And so I think the evolution of consciousness from the information age into the consciousness age is being aware of the fact that I don't need all that stuff. I mean, I want what I want. I can let go of conspicuous consumption. I can let go of all that needing to have more than everybody else had. And I can spend more time with all my needs met and most of my wants met, contemplating, understanding who I am, unique from everybody else, and who I am as part of everybody else. And that's where we wake up. When we move away from just wanting to know stuff so that we can own more stuff to the point where we let go of knowing and let go of being that full cup that you can't put any more into, and start again with beginner's mind and say and recognize the unknowing, or recognize how little we actually do know.
Steve, let's define consciousness a little bit, because if we're going to expand on this idea, I want to make sure we're using a word that we can agree on the definition.
Sure. Because it's a lot of things. It's more than one thing. It starts with sentience. It starts with just knowing that you're alive and not inert. That's the beginning of it. But there's obviously so much more.
That's Descartes. I think, therefore I am, right?
Yeah. Of course, we're taking it a step farther. We're saying the fact that I'm aware of the fact that I think makes me for sure I am.
Which is a really significant point. Descartes, or what's often called a Cartesian view of the universe, is very mechanical.
Right.
And it's real easy to feel like you're a victim or an effect of a Cartesian worldview. The world is just a big clock or a big mechanism, and I think, therefore I am, fits into that. But increasingly we're looking at the universe less as a big machine, as Descartes did, and more as an idea. More as an idea with an evolving perspective or point of view. And by evolving, I mean a perspective that is being elevated, that we can have a higher perspective and see a broader horizon, see connections and harmony, where before all we saw was what appeared to be separation and difference. We're going from a world of you or me to a world of you and me. where I can be of assistance to you, honor my connection to you, ecology and the environment begins to make perfect sense. Though, again, it's paradoxical to say the unity of human consciousness or the unity of the ecosystem, for example, relies upon diversity and even uniqueness. And you go, whoa, hold on, wait a minute, I got to get my head around that. The strength, and let's just talk about the ecosystem, the environment, and then we'll extend it to consciousness and the entire universe. But just look at the ecology of the earth as we've come to understand it. Strength comes from and relies upon diversity in what's sometimes called the food chain. It's a little more complicated than that. But you have all these unique species, and even within a given species, all these unique individuals. The universe goes out of its way to avoid replication. DNA has proven this. There are no two creatures alike, no two cells alike, no two grains of sand exactly alike. And this is what mystics have been saying for 1,000 years. They say the whole universe is in every one of these distinct pieces, just as every one of these unique pieces is in the oneness of all things. We're on the edge of being able to face, with eyes open, and hearts and minds open and attuned and aligned as well, this paradox of the one and the many. And it's rich and beautiful. It's not enough to say, oh, that confuses me and walk away. We have to face it, primarily by honoring diversity, respecting uniqueness, and seeing the mutual benefit in sharing your life with other people. John Donne was right. No man is an island.
So part of defining consciousness is it wants to grow in that direction. It wants to move in all those ways. It wants to get better. It wants to become more refined. It wants to understand itself and others more than it has before. And you know, with some bumps in the road, because no evolution is smooth, it moves in that direction. It continues to grow in that direction. One of the natures of consciousness is that it's aware of itself, and then it continues to evolve. It continues to grow. It continues to better itself. It continues to refine itself and become more and more effective, more and more efficient, more and more understanding of what it is and its potential.
So we've got in consciousness improved mental intelligence, just being smarter, improved emotional intelligence. This is where our motivation and our caring comes from, our love, our kindness, our generosity, our empathy.
And managing our anger and our fear and our hatred and all the other negative emotions so that we can have them and experience them and grow from them, but not ineffectively act upon them.
And then beyond increased mental intelligence and emotional intelligence has to be these concepts we're hinting at of values and ethics and morality, which, again, don't seem to be just randomly bestowed upon us, but part of the goodness that's in us, but needs development. Without, some parenting, for example, a little kid has as much potential to be horrible as he does to be beautiful and wonderful, and we sort of guide them into seeing the benefits of being a good little boy or a good little girl, but of course, that shadow side continues to be with us. Many men encounter that for the first time in war, for example, and they find themselves capable of doing things that they could scarcely conceive of and have to live the rest of their life facing the fact that there is a shadow in each and every one of us. If we don't have a theater like war to discover that in, you might find it in the strangest of places, but part of this expanding awareness, this whole age that Steve and I are proposing, is next in line after the information age, or the computer age, so-called. An age of consciousness is about discovering that we're more than the humans we've always thought we were. We're more than these angry, selfish, cynical creatures. There is goodness deep inside us that wants to come out. There's truth, there's beauty, I mean, the fact that, for example, that a lie detector works, to me is evidence of the goodness of human beings. That here's a machine that measures stress and anxiety as muscular tension and respiration and pulse and galvanic skin response. And when you tell a lie, your body feels endangered and the machine picks it up. Well, that's a built-in program. When I lie, my body feels wrong. And it can lead to something called dis-ease, right? Doesn't that indicate, isn't there strong evidence in there that there is goodness in all people? It's not so much this blank slate that we're born with, but I hasten to add, in addition to that goodness, it is inherent in everyone, is this shadow side too. And part of developing your conscious awareness is looking at the dark as well as the light.
So if the beginning of understanding the nature of consciousness is that it's aware of itself, it's sentient, and then the second thing is that it grows, it gets better, it gets more refined, it gets more evolved, that's part of its process. Then the third, I think, is the one that you touched on before, which is that it moves from a me to an us. It moves to a deeper connection to being part of a whole humanity thing. And consciousness can rise above just being this body or just being these thoughts or these feelings or this stuff that I own. Consciousness is aware of all those things, but it's also aware of the fact that on some level I'm in some kind of a connection with every other human being that's alive in the whole world and every other animal. And there's this deeper understanding that the tribe extends beyond me and my immediate family. It now is, because I'm safe, because I'm virtually always out of danger, I can understand that everybody is part of this thing called us. And I think that's where consciousness always goes, out of the me and into the us.
Yeah, as you and I record this, Steve, we're at the beginning of the year 2010, and the, for us, new 3D James Cameron film, Avatar, has just come out, and clearly that's one of the themes that he's trying to, with the producers and other writers, trying to get across, this idea that these, if you will, primitive people, these natives, these pre-industrialized, unsophisticated people, they don't have the technology that the alien earthlings have, but what they do have is a sensitivity to the oneness of all life. I mean, that ecological message, that's a tree hugger message. I think they're even referred to as tree huggers in there at some point, in a disparaging way, of course, that the oneness of life, and it's explained by the scientist. It's the roots of a tree coming almost in contact with the roots of another tree, how that's like the synapse in the brain, and then you have all of the trees in the forest. So maybe the tree knows it's a tree, but it also knows that it's part of this group of trees here, you know, and then maybe it knows it's part of the larger group that is the forest, and then it knows it's part of this ecosystem called the watershed, and the consciousness of the plant kingdom, the consciousness of the animal kingdom, the consciousness of the universe as a universe, as one whole thing, we can't begin to look at unless and until we look at our consciousness as the one that perceives this reality. We are changing. That's what's exciting about this so-called new age, this age of consciousness, is that we will change reality by changing our perception of it.
Right. Just as we've done several times in the past.
Well, we always have, but now we're conscious of the choice we're making to change it in a positive direction.
But, you know, the late hunter-gatherers became conscious of the alternative of becoming agrarian, of settling down, you know, and creating a safer lifestyle for themselves. And then the agrarians at the end of that age more and more became aware of the fact that safety is in the industrial world, in the city. And we became aware of, to protect and provide for our family, we'll move there. And in the information age, it was get your degree, learn stuff, you know. I mean, it's not how big and strong you are anymore, you know. It's not how many of those widgets you can make. It's are you the guy that invented the next widget? You know, it's in this age of knowledge. And now we're finally understanding that it was always just a small number of people that started the movement, until it created critical mass. Now there's that small number now that are understanding that owning more and more stuff isn't the name of the game. Really the name of the game is self-actualization, is unfolding awareness, is becoming the best you can be and the happiest you can be and the most successful you can be by your terms, not by society's terms. And I think more and more people are waking up to that. And it doesn't take everybody for the age to change. Just when a really relatively small number of people get this and they show the rest of the population that, hey, you thought the best way to be was to be this famous baseball player or this famous movie star or this famous rich person, and they're all miserable and divorced and in the news, and yet you see over here there's these guys, they've got plenty, they've got all that they need. There's these men and women that are living a life of contemplation and understanding, and that's really I want to grow up to be one of those. And I think that's where the age of consciousness begins.
By way of creating a transition out of how do we do this, and we're going to do an exercise to offer you one way to begin to promote the self-initiated growth of awareness or consciousness. I think we also need to hit on, Steve, is the understanding that awareness or consciousness is largely fearless, or at least courageous enough to face the fear, to move into it, which is what vaporizes fear. Fear is a shadow, and it basically represents things unknown, so when we move into it, we know it, and it ceases to be, one of the great ironies of fear. That understanding has to be part and parcel of being aware. I am awake, I am aware, I am alert, I am lucid, and I'm moving right at my fear. I may not be fearless yet, but I've found it. It's right there, the heart of darkness, straight ahead. Here I go, here we go. And as I move toward it, I understand it, and it ceases to be.
Yeah, in fact, it's always been the movement toward fear, and facing fear that causes this conscious evolution. When the nomadic people faced the idea of their greatest fear, which is not having enough food, they came up with a solution, which is planting seeds in the ground and domesticating animals. And when those people took an even bigger view on survival and said, well, I don't know if next season I'm going to have enough food, then they moved into the cities to create a guaranteed weekly paycheck. And then when those parents looked at their children and said, don't work in the factories, you need to go to college, you need to get a degree, you need to learn stuff, because knowledge is the most valuable commodity in the world. And parents taught their children to become knowledge oriented, and that became knowledge to create power, to create money, to create stuff. I think, again, the next evolution is the parents of tomorrow saying to their children, the way to go is to create peace of mind, to create happiness, to have your own little place, and to live green, and to live with other people, and to live in harmony. That's really the nirvana on earth, not having lots and lots of stuff.
Well, and that's, again, what's so significant about this break. We've talked from the beginning of this episode today about the transition, the history, or the unfoldment of the hunter-gatherers becoming the agrarians, becoming the industrial revolution, becoming the computer age or information age. As Steve just pointed out, all of that is motivated by fear. I mean, you could look at it as an aspiration to safety, but it's largely running away from the unknown. The thing about this next age of conscious awareness is the reorientation, the shift of the polarities, if you will, where at this point we begin to move toward what we do want and what we can visualize as being for the greater good of everybody, instead of you or me or this group defeating that group, instead of the whole standard paradigm of right defeating wrong, or even good defeating evil. What we now have is love and vision and awareness replacing fear and ignorance.
And I guess that's one of the ways we know we're there, when we have a world that is, essentially about equal rights for everybody, when we have a world that is about solving our difficulties without battles or fighting with each other, when we have a world that is oriented toward empathy and humanity and understanding. When those who have more than they need look at those who have less than they need and help them out of the goodness of their heart, those are the indications. And those things are all happening to some extent in the world today. And when there becomes a critical mass, when we reach that point, when we believe that, enough of us believe that, I think that's the age of consciousness. It's happening quickly, very, very quickly. I mean, you take a look at the nomadic age arguably began maybe 150,000 years ago and went to about 12,000 years ago. That was the agrarian age, about 12,000 years ago. Then the agrarian age went from 12,000 years ago till about 1760, 1780, end of that part of the 1700s. And that went until like from 1760 to 1960. That was just a couple of hundred years until we hit the information age. And so we've gone from like hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds, and now it's like a decades. And so this new age is happening in this hyperbolic curve, as you said, this amazing speed, and we're entering into it now. And it's literally, I mean, the whole stuff about 2012, I mean, that's right around now, the age of Aquarius, the changing of so much. It's so many signs leading up to the point that human beings are becoming different, better, growing one more time, living on the world a different way, just like we did from the industrial age to the information age. We began to move from the cities to the suburbs. Now I think we may move to physically to new locations in the world, spreading out around the world so that we all have more space. As I think one of the greatest things about being conscious is that you realize you need to be connected to the planet. You need to touch the earth and have your own space in the world. So all kinds of things are indicating that we're moving in this direction. And how quickly it happens, well, again, everything's speeding up at such an amazing rate. I wouldn't be surprised if it's certainly in the very near future.
And as the historians and writers often say, it's darkest before the dawn often. And so these are very scary times where our government leaders are using fear to encourage us to be afraid of enemies who are trying to frighten us. That's a little bizarre. A great conspiracy of everybody be afraid, be very afraid, run away, run away. Sounds to me like a cover for don't look at what we're doing over here, just get busy being scared and stay paralyzed. But look what happens. Even to a tragedy like 9/11, if and when you're able to step into this new age and use a phrase as simple as, that was one of us. There is nobody here called them. What if, as simply as that, there's no them, there's one planet, there's one people. Some are wonderful people, some are horrible people. Every country, every region, every state has some wonderful saint-like women and men, and some horrible people that you better not turn your back on. And when you look at 9/11, instead of deciding what nation they were from, what language they spoke, why they did what they did in terms of skin color or religion, what if you honored the diversity, respected it as diversity, but then went to the next step and said, that was horrible, that was unbelievably evil, that 19 of us did that, 19 human beings with box cutters. I mean, this is the story we're being told anyway. I'm not sure exactly what did happen on that day, but we're told 19 guys from 3 or 4 different countries attacked somebody that was not them. That's the way we've always viewed the world. But what if you, just in your own mind, said, well, there's nobody here called them? Remember in the 50s when aliens were people from Mars or Jupiter, not from Mexico? There are no aliens here. There's just earthlings, and some of us did that. Some horrible human beings did that. That's a paradigm shift. That's a shift in consciousness, and is already changing and will continue to change the way we deal with that problem.
So as we can understand that there's no them, there are individuals that misbehave, and they need to be punished in the way that I think is most humane to punish them and most effective in getting them to change their behavior if possible. But that's not to cast aspersions on who their relatives are or who their neighbors are or who believes the same religion they believe. That's a higher consciousness. When you can see an individual and say that person, what they did is bad. Now, that doesn't mean they have a bad mom. That doesn't mean they have a bad. It's just them that did that. That's a higher perspective and a higher way of looking at things. And I think that's another one of those great definitions of the evolvement of consciousness, is to recognize there is only us. It's not us and them. There is only us. And even among us, there are some problem children we need to handle. There are some issues that we need to deal with, but they're part of us. They're all part of us. And to not raise ourselves and say, oh, us is good and them is bad. And when we do that, that's appealing to that knowledge is power thing. I think the whole Bush era was like a last grasp of the knowledge-based era to hold on to itself, to hold on to like the world being this way, where we know stuff that you don't know, and we're going to use that information like to have more power than you. I think that was a fearful grab at that, trying to make us all afraid of a world that's really very, very safe. So now we're moving beyond that, and we're recognizing that, hey, there was no weapons of mass destruction. There was no any of that stuff that they said. There was no such thing as a war on terrorism. How can you have a war on terror? It's like having a war on terror is like a war on a behavior. That's like having a war on anger or having a war on procrastination. I mean, you can't have a war on a behavior. You can have a war on a group of people. A war has to be my country's army against your country's army. You can't have a war on terrorism. We're always going to have people who are behaving in that way. Among us, there's always going to be people who behave in that way. Some of them live in San Francisco and some of them live in Tehran. They're all over the world. There's always going to be people that we need to parent better or handle better that are going to behave that way. But that doesn't make them and us us. It doesn't make us better than them. That's, I think, one of the things we need to begin seeing.
One of the big debates right now is the right wing, the pro-war guys, if you will, the guys that want to now go into Yemen and Iran and any place else they can and start a full-fledged war against essentially 20% of the world, if you can believe that, are people that talk about the battlefield. I heard this fella on the TV news the other day talking about releasing prisoners from Gitmo to go back to the battlefield. Well, that's just it. There is no battlefield. This is not nation against nation. It's not a war. It's a law enforcement operation, and the Bush and Cheney administration took us off in that direction, and culturally, this is the battle we're fighting. It's not left versus right, or Republican versus Democrat so much as people who want to pursue a policy of perpetual global war versus those who want to move in the direction of peace and prosperity and multilateralism and deal with the bad boys as we have in the past, as if it's a law enforcement operation, right? Do we move forward with perpetual global war on a tactic where there are no battlefields and no nations to fight? Or do we work together as a world, stepping forward, moving progressively forward, multilaterally, to work in the areas of diplomacy and prevention, heading this stuff off before it happens, and instead of finding some consolation in the fact that war is profitable, begin to solve the problems of the world that lead to war in the first place. Prevention. We need more prevention in healthcare. We need more prevention in relationship management. And we sure need a whole lot more prevention in the arena of war and international tension as well.
So another one of the ways that we know we're becoming conscious or entering the age or the time of consciousness is that war becomes unpopular, that it becomes on the wane instead of waxing as it has of late, that the idea of war being an inevitable part of human experience dies away as a theory. I mean, we had slavery for a really long time, but we don't have slavery for the most part anymore, and we've had war for a really long time. We didn't really have it much in the nomadic age. That was more skirmishes. That wasn't really war. We evolved into this war thing, and we can evolve right out of this war thing, and there's no reason war has to be inevitable any more than slavery had to be inevitable. So, we reached our depths of we reached the depths of our depravity, and now we're starting to become conscious and aware and move in the other direction. So moving away from war, moving toward equal rights, moving toward solving our battles diplomatically instead of with violence, those are indications, I think, of this movement into this consciousness age, away from knowledge being power and understanding that real power comes in peace and understanding. Much more important than I know something you don't know, because that's the most valuable thing right now. Again, the price of gold, knowing that whether the gold is going to go up or down is much more valuable than gold itself. The knowledge is the power right now. We need to move to a time when the real power comes in the self-knowledge and the self-exploration, and not the power being me over you or us over them, but the power of being able to feel safe enough to ask why and to explore the possibilities of what the universe holds.
There's essentially 3 ways to create change, to accelerate your growth and step quickly and forthrightly into the age of consciousness. Bring that awareness with you into study, into meditation, and into mindfulness. To me, those are the 3 important things that will help you step into this new age of conscious awareness. You got to study. Listen to programs like this. Listen to this program again. Use the gadget on our website at focusedpassion.com to forward this program and others that you like to people you know who will appreciate it. And do the meditation exercise like the one we're about to facilitate for you. And then thirdly, be mindful of what you're learning. Okay, those 3 things. Expose yourself to new information and study. Practice the exercise of fearlessness and mental focus with emotional passion. And then be mindful as you open your eyes and return to your daily life and affairs. Have that slightly elevated perspective, and tomorrow you'll be just a little higher in your point of view. And the day after that, you continue the process of study and meditation. Your mindfulness will even be more inclusive, more harmonious, more complete. See, there's a refinement and improvement here, not just a random growth, but an advancement as we move toward our human potential and what many would argue would be our divine potential as well. So, get comfortable, sit straight, not rigid, but nicely balanced with your shoulders back, and begin to relax and feel safe with a nice, slow, deep breath.
Consciousness comes forward with that first slow, deep breath. And with the next, and the next. And you begin to find yourself in paradise, this place inside of perfect peace that you've created with your mind and heart. This place that has evolved from the first time you went here, the time when you began, when you did start. But this place, this perfect place of peace, this paradise within, this is where it all starts. This is where it begins. And from this place, you find yourself. That part of you that knows that you're not your thoughts, or you're not your feelings, or it's not what you feel or know. It's that you are aware of the fact that you have thoughts and feelings, that you know you have a body, and 2, you're aware of the fact that all the stuff you own and all the things you do, but who you are, as you awaken and understand that you were mistaken, who you really are, is the awareness, the consciousness within.
Take another nice, slow, deep breath, pulling in strength and power as you inhale. Hold for a moment, and as you exhale, feel the letting go, feel the safety, feel connected, and protected and safe. And consider how fortunate we are to live in a time when together we can actually experience an awakening unlike anything we've seen before. An awareness that's approaching critical mass even now. That the time is at hand for us to reverse our polarities, and instead of running from what we don't want and moving away from that which we fear, it's time to turn and face the fear as a symbol of what we don't know and move directly at it, into it, that you might know it better. And like a kind of spiritual warrior, you take your newfound awareness, growing with every breath, into the midst of what has frightened you, and watch it cease to exist by virtue of the fact that you consciously choose to awaken to a new identity, to awaken to a new potential, to awaken to a promise that, while attainment and growth makes a lot of sense, that even more important is your understanding that this potential is already within you and unfolding. As soon as you put your attention on that potential, it begins to come forward, to unfold, to catch your attention, allowing you to feel safer, more relaxed, more intuitive, more creative, and more effective at realizing the dreams of your expanded awareness.
So finding this paradise within more frequently in your life as a way of helping you handle the tension and the strife. For you are courageous now as you realize that what now evokes your fear isn't something dangerous, it's just something that's unclear. And because it's not dangerous, you have the courage to go forward in. Whatever it is that you don't understand, now you can begin to learn, to grow. And as you do and start to know, what becomes frightening becomes exciting in its place. You exchange fear for excitement in every case. So understand what you were afraid of isn't dangerous at all. It's just the adversity. It's difficult. It's hard. It's big, not small. It's something that you are uncertain about. It's something that you're not sure how to face. It's something that you don't have a real clear understanding of in time and in space, but it's not dangerous. So you can be courageous and move into what you fear, because what you fear cannot hurt you. It's just that you're unclear. Move with courage into fear, and fear will disappear.
Commit yourself to that. Say now to yourself, silently and internally, fear will disappear in this new year, in this new decade, in this new century, in this new life. And I am an agent of that enlightenment, that awareness, that consciousness that redeems fear into understanding, in confusion into awareness. That's a commitment you can bring with you easily and effortlessly as you now reorient yourself to the room around you, the space you'll see in a moment when we ask you to open your eyes, wide awake and alert. So recommit to that fearlessness, the freedom of the self-adventure of unfolding the truth about who you are. Better and better every day in every way. Your New Year's resolution, your new decade resolution, your new century resolution. Take a deep breath. Hold for just a moment, and as you exhale, relax. Open your eyes now, wide awake and alert, rested, and back in the room feeling fine. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everybody. And boy, it is exciting to recognize.
Happy No Fear.
Happy No Fear New Year. There you go. It's exciting to be in a time when we can live without fear, in a time when we actually are safe, that the real dangerous stuff that we face is virtually non-existent in our lives. It's a pretty amazing thing. So we can start to contemplate the big questions of our life. Part of what consciousness is about, and of course you can become conscious, part of this new age of consciousness, simply by asking yourself these questions, simply by being aware of the fact that, things you're afraid of aren't there, doesn't mean go in the other direction. Fear can be at most a yellow light that says have caution before you proceed. But proceed because the great value of moving toward what you fear, as long as it's not actually dangerous, is that it makes the fear disappear. So this is the year to move toward your fear and make the fear disappear.
I want to throw a doodah in there someplace. Hey, thanks for being with us. Thanks for 2009. Here we go into 2010. Although as you listen to this program, who knows what year it may be. In any event, we hope you're happy and healthy and getting better and better and better every day in every way, committed to the age of consciousness, to the birth of a critical tipping point when humanity goes from being motivated mostly by fear of what it doesn't understand, instead by love and vision into what it's beginning to understand, for the greater good of all concerned.
So if you're listening to this program, say in 2050, give me a call and let me know. Was I right? Did it evolve this way in the last 30 or 40 years?
And leave a message if Steve's not there. Hey, check out focusedpassion.com for the benefit of your friends. If you haven't logged in a while because you're using the RSS feed in iTunes or your browser, go in just for the purpose of sharing one with a friend. Doesn't cost an extra penny to use that gadget right below the built-in player at focusedpassion.com. Turn your friends on. Doesn't cost a thing. Send as many as you want to as many people as you'd like to enlighten, and share the good news. We're moving into a whole new age, and it's more than politics, I'll tell you that. When we talk about yes, we can, it goes way beyond politics and the kind of simple polarities that are often portrayed in the evening news, So, as always, be gentle, love life, and take care of each other. For Steve Snyder, this is Michael Benner. Aloha from Maui.